Hello ladies and gents, it's Hagbard Celine here on another beautiful afternoon, and today we're going to be discussing Jane. Not Jane Goodall, primatologist and anthropologist, that would be much more entertaining, and not Jane Austen, famous and prolific 19th century author who provided us something of a female perspective from that time. No, this is an angry little nun known as Jane Elliot, and I've chosen to do this video because I find her to be something of the root of this problem. And the clips that I'm going to show, some of which are kind of long, so I'd ask you to bear with me on that, are to highlight some of the rhetoric that she uses that we've seen trickle down. Now, she hasn't stopped doing this activity, and this footage was taken somewhere between 2000 and 2001 and released for general use in 2002. So it's somewhat old, but you'll notice the similarity in talking points, and from some of the footage I show, you'll note that she essentially hasn't changed her technique since 1970. So I'm sure that it's a very viable technique.
I consider this exercise an injection of the live virus of racism.
What she means is, it's being as insanely racist to a group of individuals that you presume are guilty of racist thoughts in an attempt to show them what racism feels like.
If you've been through this exercise, the next time you see racist behaviors, sexist behaviors, homophobic behaviors, ethnocentric behaviors, ageist behaviors, maybe you will say to yourself, wait a minute, I had that for one morning. I'm never going to allow that to happen in my presence again without responding to it negatively.
Now, she's kindly provided us with the given progressive list of thought crimes, and she's also advocating for outright activism. This is something she admits in several other locations. She considers school a form of brainwashing, so she has absolutely no problem admitting that the technique that she's employing here is an emotional manipulation and an attempt at brainwashing in another direction. She feels that it's a completely valid technique. She is also one of the people that has a problem with the concept of linear time. She seems to struggle with it. She still operates as though this is essentially 1968, and we're still fighting the battle. That being said, she does immediately jump to a Dr. Martin Luther King as her main source of inspiration, which, if you believe her own memoirs, is essentially true, although interesting if you actually understand that she began this project about Native Americans. This will be somewhat important for a clip later.
I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
On the day after Martin Luther King Jr. was killed, I decided to do an exercise that would help my students to understand racism.
By her own admission, this statement is a partial truth, because she said that she was working on this project before the death of Martin Luther King, and the focus was going to be on Native Americans. As a matter of fact, I believe in her words she was, and I quote, ironing the cloth for the teepee when Martin Luther King was shot, and she decided to change the project's focus to African Americans.
I tried to make a difference. I'm still trying to make that difference.
And she is utterly confident that she is making that difference, and that this difference is unerringly positive. Again, this will all culminate later.
Is there anyone in this United States that we do not treat as our brothers?
Yeah.
Who?
Yeah.
The black people. How are black people treated? How are Indians treated? How are people who are of a different color than we are treated?
They're part of this world. They don't get anything in this world.
Why is that?
Because they're different colors.
Note that this is a third grade classroom in 1970, and they're already capable of identifying this as a problem as soon as it's addressed. So perhaps you're not quite as needed as you think, ma'am.
I feel people need this because we are still doing now what we were doing in the 50s.
Much of this is projection and her own very personal damage, by the way. We'll explore that in a moment.
Is there anything about you people that is different from one another that we could use to make part of you.
Like the eyes, the color of the eyes.
Okay, we could use the color of your eyes. How many in here have blue eyes? Okay, how many in here have brown eyes? It might be interesting to judge people today by the color of their eyes. Would you like to try this?
So to note, this is essentially a non-scientific experiment or procedure that was forged with the assistance of third graders.
I'm trying to get the people who participate in this exercise the opportunity to find out how it feels to be something other than white in this society.
Sure, why not? Sounds like a noble enough cause. Let's watch this little exercise wherein I'm certain that you're going to use very modern and realistic understandings and interpretations of race relations in America.
What are you two going to do?
Probably line up in front of them.
That's right. They're waiting for someone to take care of them. They're in their child ego state. What are you going to do?
This is in the very first few moments of this exercise. Note the fact that the people have green collars around their necks, you know, as we've historically done to African American students in modernity. And let's also note her use of Freudian language, wherein she says they're in the child ego state. It's very interesting to me that she should employ the techniques of simultaneously Sigmund Freud and those of one of his highest rivals, of behavioralism. She very clearly is operating under a behavioral compliance technique here. It's a technique of behavior modification. And she explains that later, that she's actually not concerned with what you think. She's concerned with your exterior behavior. Again, this sounds good, but in practice. Let's see some of the examples that she gives of the ways that people of color are treated in majority white societies.
Now, while I've been talking, some of you have been sitting there reading the signs. I'm not going to put up with that any longer. So you in the back row, stand up and read the first sign on that wall back there.
Only brown eyes need apply?
Read it so we can hear you.
Only brown eyes need apply.
Oh yes, the ever-present no darkies sign that we're all so familiar with seeing on places looking for employees, right? We are for sure not blurring linear time here at all. These are things that people of color suffer today.
Next,
Blue eyes.
stand up and read the next sign. Oh, watch this one. Watch this one, please. Watch this. Sit down again, then stand up for us. Stand up.
This is Behavior Modification 101. This is compliance training. Essentially speaking, if as a person in authority you can get a human being to respond to sit-stand commands, like a dog, you can essentially get them to pull little levers that kill people, so...
That's better. Now, read the next sign.
Blue eyes shouldn't hold political office.
Next.
Again, because we all know that it's the standard policy of the United States and all majority white Western nations that people of color can't hold political office. I'll grant them that this occurred before the election of Barack Obama, this particular recording. However, it did not occur before we had plenty of people of color in positions of power and authority in the United States of America. Beyond that, even by 2001, I can rest fairly well assured that the public reaction to a sign that said brown people need not hold public office would probably be negative on the whole.
Louis, don't let
Oh, look at this. Did I tell you it was fun to watch blue-eyed people?
Now, to get into a little Freudian analysis of my own, what frightens me about this woman is she herself is fighting a ghost. She's fighting a straw man from her past. If I had to guess, she's fighting her father. Considering she's an Iowa native born in 1933, I would guess, and I probably am not far off base, that her father wasn't so fond of the melanated individuals. And that's who she's channeling when she belittles the blue-eyed people And that's who she's essentially spiting through her entire existence. This, to me, appears to be her wrestling with her past and her father. And again, I have a clip coming later that'll show a little bit of the projection of that mindset.
Next.
I'm not prejudiced. Some of my best friends are blue-eyed.
Now, I'm sure nobody in this community has heard this conversation go back and forth before. We're about to descend into I don't see color, and what that actually means. Now, let's watch this classroom discussion with some of our collegiates, shall we?
How many of you have ever heard that one before in another form? Oh, yes. Favorite claim of liberals, right? Yes. I'm not prejudiced, some of my best friends are black. Has any person ever said to you, any good liberal person ever said to you, when I see you, I don't see you black?
Every day!
Every damn day! How many of you have had that experience? When I see you, I don't see you black. And what do you say to them when they say that?
But I am.
Shit, by a one-drop rule, maybe.
But I am, and then what do they say?
They say, but I don't see color.
I don't see color. How many of you think they do see color? Well, people, if they didn't see color, they wouldn't say, when I see you, I don't see you black, because they wouldn't see black, would they? So you immediately know that they're lying, don't you?
Checkmate, atheists.
Yeah, they are lying. They're saying, I don't see your color.
No, ma'am, you're wildly incorrect on that assertion, because when one says, I don't see color, one is usually suggesting that one doesn't make presumptions about another's personality or behavioral characteristics due to the color of their skin. Do you see how you're being a deceitful bitch here, or?
Did you learn anything?
Yes.
Do you appreciate what you just learned?
Yes.
Did you like the way it was taught?
No.
No. Any of the rest of you ever taught in that fashion?
This clip is probably the longest one I'm going to roll, uncut, and it's after she essentially chose her victim. She saw someone in the audience that she knew that she could harry into tears, and she went for it. It's clear as day, and this young lady was marked from the moment she sat down. It was obvious that she was the one that could very easily be bullied into tears. That being said, let's watch the way that she handles this situation, and the way that she pivots from public shaming and bullying to either cases that no one would dispute, in the first one that she brings up in the African-American man that was dragged behind a pickup truck. Let's note that two of those people were known Aryan Brotherhood people that were ex-convicts with multiple charges. These were not good guys that anyone would support, frankly speaking. And the second one is a very, very famous case that has been disputed, even by the people that were prosecuting the case. They weren't certain it was a hate crime, and the prosecutor even admitted that the person that actually committed the murder was just on a drug-filled robbery spree. He was coming down off of crystal meth, and he had just robbed 3 other people. This final person got the worst of it.
Yeah. Yes. And did you have to express appreciation for it? Yeah. Could you learn something from her example? What are you crying about?
Sorry.
What are you crying about?
My feelings were hurt.
How were your feelings hurt?
Just weird.
Should I feel sorry for her?
I don't expect you to.
Should I feel sorry for her? Some of you are thinking, oh, this is too harsh for this young woman. James Byrd, black man in Texas, dragged to death behind a pickup truck by 3 white males. Matthew Shepard, young man about you're a little younger than you are, had the misfortune to be born gay.
And a great misfortune that is. I mean, you can take the teacher out of Iowa, but you can't take the Iowa out of the teacher, huh?
Beaten with a pistol about the head until they cracked his skull. And then they hung him on a deer fence and left him there overnight. And somebody coming along on a bicycle the next day saw a bunch of clothing hanging on this deer fence, and they went over and started to take the clothing off the deer fence and found a body in the clothing. Now, I'm sorry But those things happen because we live in a society in which people are allowed to treat those who are different in an ugly way because of their differentness.
This claim is the one that I think drives me furthest up the wall. The claim that we live in a society that allows you to treat people this way because they are different, which is interesting considering the 3 people that were involved in killing the black man by dragging him behind a pickup truck. Well, one has already been executed, the other's waiting execution, and the third one's doing 25 to life. So that doesn't seem like a permissive society to me. And when it comes to the Matthew Shepard case, the details surrounding it are hazy at best. Let's just say in 1998, nobody, including Wyoming law enforcement, wanted to discuss the fact that methamphetamine was chewing its way through Wyoming and much of the Midwest. And it was. It was indeed.
I cannot shed tears for a young white female in this exercise who knows that this is an exercise, who knows that it's temporary, who knows that she's getting a college credit, 1 hour of credit for being here. I'm sorry. I have to save my sympathy and my empathy for those who go through something much worse than this every day of their lives.
This is not the only scenario in which she reserves her empathy. Let's just say that I've noticed through several of the interviews I've watched with this lady that she has a special hateful place in her heart for white women, probably rubbed off by hanging out with Oprah and several other people that she's been interviewed by 5 or 6 times. But she has a very special place in hell for white women. It's very interesting the embitteredness that she regularly presents towards white women. I believe the quote in the interview that caught my ear was something like, most white women are airy and incapable of keeping to a single task because they have the attachment to a wealthy white man, which to me implied that, despite the fact that I believe this woman says that she has children, I get the feeling the husband's no longer in the picture. I can't imagine that there's a husband in the picture. That's all I'm saying.
You blue-eyed people think that I look angry. You're the only ones who think I look angry. I don't look angry to these brown-eyed people. Perception is everything.
Again, this is a misstatement of the situation. Were your ire to be directed at the whole of the class, you would look angry and mean to the whole of the class. However, some people in the classroom are indeed secure in the knowledge that your ire will not be directed towards them, essentially ever.
White people look vicious and ugly and non-caring and cruel and arrogant and powerful and condescending and angry. Are you angry?
No.
Oh, good for you. You angry?
Trying not to.
Trying not to be. Now, does that take a lot of energy?
Yes.
Yes. Are you holding it in?
Yes.
Yes. And are you trying really, really hard not to react to me?
Yes.
Yes. And are you trying really hard not to look at me?
At the moment, yes.
Yes. Why?
Because I don't want to make myself more upset.
You don't want to make yourself more upset by looking at me.
Yes.
Right. Does that take a lot of time, a lot of energy?
Yes.
Yes. Is that hard for you?
Yes.
Could you develop an ulcer over this?
No.
If you had to do it every day, what would happen to your blood pressure?
It would rise.
Yeah. If somebody stood over you and you knew it was going to happen every day, or you expected it to happen every day, or it happened when you didn't expect it to, or it happened to your kids every day, after it happened to your mother every day.
I'm going to make a statement here, and I edited this video down from about an hour. The statement I'm going to make is that there is not a single individual post, I'd say 1975, that experiences the behavior that she exhibits towards these students. Not one. If any teacher in modernity were to behave the way that she behaves towards the students in this classroom, they would be fired, if not arrested. I mean, in modernity, they'd probably be charged with something of a hate crime. This is not a thing that is endured every day or expected to be endured every day by anyone, and hasn't been for a significant period of time. This woman lives in the past, And I'm not exaggerating. This woman literally lives as though it were an archaic time. She hasn't processed any cultural shifts. She sees them as regressions. Later, she actually makes a statement as such. This next clip coming up is taken from after a student left the classroom, essentially upset by the entire proceedings. It's interesting, if you watch the preceding clip and this clip, you get a fairly fleshed out version of how she feels that anybody who's non-white feels in the classroom or in any majority white area. Previously you see that it's deeply oppressive, and then now you're going to see, let's say, why the academic performance rates can be lower in some communities than the other. This is her theory.
You think she's learning anything in the hall?
Probably not.
Probably not. Did she choose then not to learn?
Yes.
Yes, because the learning situation is not one in which she feels comfortable or in which she feels secure, so what does she do? Leaves. Now, lots of people of color, blacks, Latinos, Native Americans, Asian Americans, drop out.
Now, quickly correct that statement so that they don't have any agency. Go.
Well, they don't drop out. They get pushed out.
Simply because they feel uncomfortable due to their skin tone? Or are you going to give us an alternative reason here that somewhat debunks that, but actually leads to a much more in-depth and sometimes uncomfortable conversation?
We create an unwelcoming environment for those who are other than white, and whose lifestyles may be different, and whose culture may be different, and we make it uncomfortable enough for them that they decide to leave.
Now, she notes two other things there, and glides right over them without actually defining what she means by that, and then thus how the majority culture should operate in response to these secondary, and I quote, lifestyles and cultures.
And lose the education, or lose the job, which means they lose their living. They leave as a result of putting up with it for years and years and years and years, and they risk a great deal. She risk anything by leaving? No. The only thing that she's going to miss is the learning.
There's no learning here at all. This is akin to those whiteness study programs where white students were meant to essentially play act as slaves while black students acted as slave drivers. It's not an efficient learning tool at all. It actually tends to brew resentment and sensitivity in both parties. And unlike this woman's assertions that what she does works, I have the science that says it doesn't. As a matter of fact, this isn't a recommended technique.
I think the exercise does indeed make them more aware. Things are better than they were when I was 13. They're not as good as they were when I was 50.
So we have two major assertions there. First, she asserts that it makes them more aware. Interestingly, the studies do bear that out. However, it's in a negative aspect. It tends to make white people incapable of any sort of dialogue because they've become too wary to engage in the conversation for fear of being called out in it. This, again, has been proven. It also has tended to make African American students, even ones that you taught over in England, claim that something along the lines of not putting change in their hand when they were at a store is a form of racism. Even though when a behavioral scientist went out and actually documented this, they found that it's to do with the teller. The teller themselves has a tendency not to touch anyone's hand. It's not a racist move. If anything, it's a germophobic move. And that's something that needs to be stopped. Germophobia is wrong.
Anybody sad? What were you sad about?
That you would teach this in the manner that you chose.
Something in this young man recognizes that this isn't right, and this isn't effective, and that this isn't working. And he tries to articulate this point in his own special way here.
That I would teach this in the manner that I chose.
Kind of like fighting fire with fire.
Yeah, but that works.
Yeah, but I mean, I already knew the lesson, and I'm not really playing a game either. So I wasn't intimidated by you because I don't have I don't believe that people have power over me, and I don't believe that I have power over them.
And here we have her revealing that her motives are indeed not to change people's ideas, but behavioral control. Now, on one level, I understand and empathize with this, and this technique. However, on this issue, I don't think it's perhaps the method that is most fulfilling.
You sitting on the floor?
Yes.
You wearing that collar?
Yes.
Did you drop your head and not grin when I told you to drop your head and not grin?
I want a credit. I want to get it that way.
Yeah, were you willing to do this to get the credit?
Yes.
Yes, so can I manipulate you?
Yes.
The answer to that is, arguably, no. Because if you've already defined, this experiment has a time limit. So, if I submit to all of your little rules in the little game you're playing for an hour and a half, 2 hours, however long this program lasts, I have manipulated you and the system into getting a credit without you meaningfully changing my behavior or belief systems. Do you see how it's not actually an effective system?
You can't change
Did I?
my soul. You can manipulate
Did I? Do
my
I care
body.
about your soul? Let me make something perfectly clear here. This is not about your soul.
But the lesson that you're trying to teach is you're trying to change people's soul. We're talking about...
Wait a minute, you're defining me.
Well, I'm sorry.
That is not the
I'm
lesson.
sorry, but you
no,
define
no,
me as
no,
white,
no,
and I'm
no.
Native American.
Okay, you're Native American.
Yes.
You can pass as white, can't you?
Yes, I can.
Again, I just like to note at this intersection that her project was originally on the mistreatment of Native Americans and the Native population in America. It shifted after Martin Luther King was shot. But I'm sure she's really proud of this moment, as she essentially denies his native status simply because he is white passing. Again, this is language that has continued on for the next 16 years, and it's trickled up to the mainstream. We're now seeing this woman's ideology trickled up to the mainstream.
You can pass when you want to, can't you? And you pass when it's good for you, don't you?
I guess so. I don't do it intentionally.
Now, as a Native American, you know a whole lot more about being discriminated against than a whole lot of white folks do.
But it's never as bad as the openly identifiable existence of melanin in your skin. Nothing ever is, nothing ever can be. And that's not a racist statement. That's an anti-racist statement.
You still, because you can pass, probably don't know as much about being discriminated against, actively discriminated against in this country, as blacks who are obviously black. You can pass. People won't know you're Native American unless you tell them.
Don't you love it when the anti-racist crowd has essentially adopted the one-drop rule policy or the visible color policy, wherein as long as you're not too dark or you pass the brown bag rule, you're good. I mean, you're essentially white. Now, let's get on to her minor cry fest, where she proclaims that she swears she's not a sadist. She's done this for 40 years out of self-sacrifice. Like, this is why I call her a nun, because it's very reminiscent of that thought pattern. She herself is long-suffering, and has suffered this suffering and inflicted it upon her students for their own good, and for a greater cause, for the greater cause.
Make no mistake about this, this is not fun. I'll go home tonight and I'll have migraine headache for 2 days. I'll have 2 days of migraine headache, because doing this exercise is in total opposition to what I believe in. This is absolutely in opposition to everything that I believe and everything I've taught my children.
And again, she says my children there, but I'm not wholly certain that she's speaking of children that she's had, or children as in how many school teachers talk about their children. And considering she was a 3rd grade school teacher, I'll never know.
But I happen to think that this exercise can make a difference in people's behaviors and in their understanding of other people. Now, that doesn't make me willing to suffer. I'm not willing to suffer, but if you raise that hand, I'm going to break it off and hit you over the head with it. But don't you think I want you to suffer?
These are the ramblings of someone that is certain, 100%, that what they are doing is correct and are ideologically driven and pure to do it.
I think this exercise is important. And I know this exercise worked. I know it worked.
Yes, I'm absolutely certain that you know it worked, just as most faith healers are absolutely certain that they've cured the cancer in their patients. That being said, again, the science does not bear you out, ma'am. As a matter of fact, the science says that your exercise lessens discrimination significantly against Latinos and Asians, but does next to nothing against African American students. As a matter of fact, what it does is breed oversensitivity in the African American students that are constantly on the alert and lookout for racism, and breeds insecurity into your white students, who are now completely obsessed with not being racist, and interjecting themselves into third-party lives when they perceive a form of racism, regardless of whether actual racism has occurred or not. Almost symptomatic of what we're seeing today, isn't it?
I know it worked. I know it could make a difference if you chose to let it make a difference.
I know that you will be saved if you just let the Lord Jesus into your heart. Just believe in the Lord Jesus and you will be saved.
That's worth having a migraine headache for, make no mistake about that. If I could change one person so that when he or she left here today, they would be different from what they were when they came in. If I could make one white person in this room a different kind of person than I was when I was your age, that would make a migraine headache worth it.
So, as usual, as we see with this type of individual, we see that what they were was they were racially bigoted, likely raised in a racially bigoted household in Iowa. Not an unusual prospect, especially in 1930 to 1940-50. That era of Iowa probably had some serious racist overtones. However, she's carried that with her whole life, and presumed that everybody's upbringing was even remotely similar to the madness that she likely endured when she was growing up. And she's continued to project that onto people for 40 fucking years. So, to lighten the mood and just for fun, one of her final statements has allowed us to play the game of progressive or racist or anti-racist.
We are different on the outside. Are you and I the same on the inside?
We're both loving people with good souls, but we're not.
No. Have you ever been pregnant?
No.
No. So are you and I the same on the inside?
No.
No, absolutely. Are you and I the same on the inside? Absolutely. Are our psychologies the same? No. The psychology of whites is not the same as the psychology of blacks, or Native Americans, or Latinos, or Asian Americans. Male psychology isn't the same as female psychology. The psychology of the young isn't the same as the psychology of the old. We are as different on the inside as we are on the outside, and we have the right to be so. People, don't deny differences. Accept them, appreciate them, recognize them, and cherish them. They are extremely important.
Ma'am, I'll have you know that there are some white nationalists that fervently agree with you.
I think the exercise does indeed make them more aware, and I think it does indeed make them, allow them to have more empathy. I know it does. I think it changes the way they think about themselves and their environment. I think it changes the way they perceive others. I think it changes the way they perceive their own power. The exercise is over.
As is my video on you, oh dear nun of the progressive Catholic Church. So, now the question. Why do I care? Why did I do an excess of 30-minute long video about some shrill Harpé nun woman that spouts some vaguely familiar rhetoric, but likely holds no sway or power in modernity? Well, you'd be wrong, ladies and gentlemen. She's a very well-known and well-respected anti-racist activist. And she's also the person who has embodied the model upon which workplace diversity training is based. She has continued to do this experiment into 2014, if I remember correctly, wherein she had a BBC special where she did the same thing. The analysis of even that BBC special by the general public is quite amusing, and if you can find it, I would advise that you flip through it. If I can find it, I'll link it in the description, along with the 2 academic papers that were done on her project, showing that the results were flimsy at best and damaging at worst. And some of her other videos that I've collected that, if you want to, and you frankly think your blood pressure can take it, have fun getting through them. I'll also be linking this original video, which, as I said, is about an hour long, and it's physically painful to get through. However, I do like tracing the history of this movement, and it is quite interesting to find out that it's been brewing very slowly under the surface for about 60 years. And she's a byproduct of that. She's essentially a reactionary that has been part of the educational system in America and many corporations, if her cover sheet is to be believed, and done diversity training for them. She's a symptom of this, and quite an early one. And I think it's important for us to understand that this isn't new, that this whole ideology, this whole movement, didn't occur in a vacuum over the course of the last 4 or 5 years. That there are people that have been educating the youth in this manner for about 40 years. And that might be why we have such an ideologically obsessed youth now. Because we're working on what? Generation 3? Generation 4? Of people that have been taught this happy horseshit that has no application in reality. And that's it for me, ladies and gents. I hope that this was informative, if not entertaining, and I would sincerely invite you to go look into this woman as much as possible. Some of her interviews are quite revealing when she doesn't think that they're going to be aired on national television. She seems to think it's more difficult to get a hold of YouTube videos, but it's not. Just because the gentleman who you were doing an interview with doesn't have a huge audience doesn't mean it doesn't show up on a Google search. Thanks for being here. As usual, stay safe, good luck, and goodbye.